She asked me if I had any disorder or disability, and I said I do have autism. I'm autistic. And she said, from how I see it, you don't seem to have autism.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Roll With It podcast with me, your host, Jules. Today on the podcast, we have Andrew. Andrew got his disability studies degree at Toronto Metropolitan University. Today we will be diving into the topic of accommodations in the academic space. Please welcome Andrew. Hi, Andrew, and welcome to the Roll With It podcast. How are you on this lovely Friday?
Hi, Jules. It's so great to be on your show. I feel very excited and I feel very honored and thrilled to be on your show and very excited to be talking about my lived experience being autistic.
I'm very looking forward to learning more about autism. Can you tell us more a little bit about when you were diagnosed?
So that's a great question. So it started off where I was attending a neurotypical school called Riverside Public School. In 2004, I was tested on the autism spectrum where from a school psychologist because I was in different neurotypical classrooms in grades 1 and 2. And in the first month in grade 3, I was struggling. So all I do remember vividly of how I felt differently from other kids because I know for the fact that they know who they want to be, who they are friends with. I was mocked by one person mocking me for having bionicles. And I'm unapologetic for growing up with those toys. But I felt different. I felt alienated because of my autism. And I was struggling in the first month of grade 3 with Miss Hunter. Yeah, she was all right, but she wasn't very supportive. And my mom did say to me once that Miss Hunter said, I don't have time to help your son or to support your son. So Mr. Mercer, who was the principal of my school back in my time, he suggested that I should move to another school with an ASD program, Britannia Public School. Yeah, it's just an image of it, but I had extra additional support in a smaller ASD class, Miss Lisa Elcock, and in grades 4 and 5, Miss Joy Canifor. So I felt like I was doing well in my special education system because if I had not been tested, I would have fallen through the cracks and I wouldn't be where I am today. So being autistic for 22 years is an identity that I always want to share because being vulnerable about it to other people is how I just want to feel valued, to be understood. And even when I say to my friends or to people that I'm autistic, I want people to know that I am autistic and to not assume that I don't look autistic. And this the norm that we live in society where we appear very normal or non-disabled, but I always have a respectful conversation about why it's important not to assume that I don't look autistic. Autism has been a very important part of my life and for my friends. Most of my friends are racialized. Some of my friends like Earl, Chelsea, Joyce, Jamal, Calvin, shout out to them. But yeah, so like intersectionality from their identity and from my own lived experience growing up with the in the special education system.
Thank you so much for sharing. I can relate in a little bit. I was diagnosed at 10 years old with a mild learning disability and having a physical disability, which is dystonia, a neurological movement disorder. I started limping at 10. I got diagnosed with a learning disability at 10. And I remember it's quite difficult to get the support you need in school while trying to remain having a childhood, making friends. So I really empathize with your experiences. It's not easy being a disabled adult, but being a disabled child, in my experience, was quite difficult. Did you have quite a difficult time making friends as a child, and did that change as you learned more about your disability?
I felt before I was diagnosed, I was struggling to make friends. As I mentioned, I felt alienated. As time went on in Britannia and Camilla and West Credit, I felt I've had a lot of great friends that I knew, but when it came to West Credit Secondary School, I was placed in a home-based program, vocational too, because West Credit Secondary School is not just a skill trade school, but it's also a vocational school. So we have an individual education plan, which I actually had started from Britannia. But most of my friends were in home base, and there are also those who need additional support in the bridge program. So I've after since I left West Credit 11 years ago, I've done a lot of contemplation every day, knowing that how much regret that I try to fit into the near typical popular crowd. I was being someone I was not. I was wearing that cat's cringe every time I look back 1 decade ago. But one of my favorite memories at West Credit was like going on the GLE class trips to Streetsville Bowl or go to Palladium or go to Air Mills Town Center as a group. Most of my ERFs were very supportive, and my teachers like Joanne Geddes, Brent English, Elaine Irwin, Janice McIntyre, they all taught us to learn how to be independent. So we learned how to build our life skills, like learning how to pay for our lunch or taking public transit using the purple My Way stickers back then. But it was a bit of a struggle trying to find people outside the home based program. Some of them were decent, but I've learned over the years of how people can sometimes be very fake. They just act right in front of your face, but behind your back, they're just a completely different person. So I didn't struggle too much in high school, but I really wish that I could have stayed more in the home-based program because that's where my real friends are. And I remember the days where we played Guitar Hero on Fun Fridays, and my friend Russell would be like, "Which one of you screwed up? Our song failed. Someone screws up about it." But I just want to say that even as a disabled activist, I always think about the people who made me today. I don't really want to forget the people like the teachers and my friends that I've grew up with since childhood, all the way into middle school and high school. But Sheridan College, my major, and I know that the question will bleed into another one, which is educational support. So that passion originally, I the childcare was like a possibility, but then I thought childcare wasn't really for me because I just didn't really feel connected to it. It wasn't really right for me. So working with disabled students and building that relationship was something much more personal to me. Disability is interconnected to my lived experience and my passion. So educational support, I took a summer program 11 years ago. It's called STEPS. So it's just a program for students registered with accessible learning. So it was a 3-day program that I had to go during the week in July 2015, transitioning from West Credit into Sheridan. So on the first day, we all met up in the marketplace where the cafeteria. And then my mom took off and I went with my cohort into the G wing. So we had to go up an upper corridor into the other wing. But we had Jenny Castleman, Dana Brennard, and Donna Woodstock that led the program. So Jenny Castleman was also my accessible learning advisor at Sheridan. But the program learned had taught me to learn how to advocate for my needs because high school's different when you have teachers that try to look after you, but college is another different, and university is a different environment where you have to really advocate for your own needs, self-advocacy, something that has been very heavily emphasized in disability studies and in our community, as you probably know. So the educational support program, I took 4 or 5 courses in fall 2015, plus an essential communication skills course, but I was struggling and I felt like I usually in class, I sit in the front for every course, but I was struggling with that course and I was so overwhelmed. And so I learned to step out my comfort zone and just say to Jenny, look, I am not really doing so well in essential communications. I feel like I'm just not gonna succeed. And then she helped me drop out of that course. And then I took the essential communications in spring summer 2016 with another elective, but I felt that the courses were, most of them were very relatable. Autism spectrum disorder with Helen Lovato. We had a really nice trip to the park home school for the Snoozland room, so it's right attached to Fletcher's Meadow. But I thought it was a really great trip because it was also mandatory because it was for an assignment. But my most favorite course from that program that introduced me to disability studies is disability issues with Professor Jennifer Tate. I actually had a did a guest lecture for her course back in February.
Awesome.
So she introduced me to the social medical model, eugenics, the role perception, stereotypes, myths. We had our panel debate assignment, the film analysis, media file. That was one of my most favorite courses that I remember. And there's something that I wish I knew, that it was a foundational course to disability studies. That's something I wish I just told myself, like, go for it.
Mm.
Go for it. Why are you hesitating? Go for it.
Yes.
Because I know that's where my future is. I've realized that's where I found my future, my community. And now into disability studies at TMU, which I'm a proud graduate, class of 2023. I did a thesis project on how autistic people are represented in the show Atypical through social,
Mm.
romantic, or platonic relationships. And I pointed out about the misrepresentation of BIPOC autistic people because predominantly media representation focuses on heterosexual, white, privileged autistic men. But where is the intersectionality of autism? So that was one of my thesis projects. And now that I'm looking to do my master's at critical disability studies at York University in the future.
Sounds amazing. I would like to dive into more of the accommodation system in post-secondary education. I don't think I would be where I am today without support from my parents and my friends. I remember being in high school, I was automatically put into the essential courses, and in high school, I didn't feel like I was smart enough for college, let alone university. So, can you tell me more about your support system in being in university?
Thank you for that question. Just like you mentioned, that I also had parental support at Sheridan, and my mom is like my biggest supporter because she always wants me to do well, to do what's best for me. Sometimes as an autistic person, I just like to be alone. But there are times where I wish I just could hang out with friends, go to the marquee. But we did once with my group. But the only time I got to see my friends is only if we do a group project or an assignment. Like Michael, Jacqueline, Tara, and I, we were like the powerhouse of the educational support program. We worked hard on the assignments, but other than that, I rarely know anyone outside of the ed support programs. And TMU is quite different because the DSD programs courses, most of them, the majority of them are online. But I got to sometimes visit the DST office, see Eliza, see Esther, see Paris, and yeah, mostly I like to roam around the halls. But mostly, I feel like TMU is quite better than Sheridan because I was born in Toronto. I've always loved to see or to have a walk around Toronto. I've always been like that ever since I was little. I've always loved traveling to my favorite city. Going back to Sheridan with the accommodations, I've been talking to myself, reflecting about how at Sheridan, like Jenny Castleman would send out the accommodations to my profs. And when I ever have an exam or a test, I would fill out a form in the accessible learning office. I'll write it down and then take it to my profs. And whereas TMU, that I have am solely responsible of sending my accommodations digitally through Clockwork. So most of my profs were super accessible because they're also disabled as well. So they know what it's like to have access needs. And I also want to emphasize this about access intimacy. So when someone brings up about having your acts about having an access need and then they accept it, you get this very tenderness feeling. And I just want to mention that because when people think about accessibility, they think about providing wheelchair ramps and accessible doors, but access goes beyond providing the physicality of it. It's a support network where you people work together, whether if it's two or more people from an interdependent approach to see like how can we meet your needs, whether you are facilitating a digital or an in-person event or accommodating a disabled student in a post-secondary institution.
Thank you for sharing. So I would like to unpack more accommodations. Did you find that they were supportive, or were there any suggestions you would make to enhance the support at TMU or in general in the school system?
It's really interesting. At TMU, I had an accessible accommodation advisor named Gafira. So on my first day of visiting TMU with my mom, we had an appointment on it's like the fourth floor, the green floor. But Gafira was very accessible. We went over about my accommodations. But interesting, around 2022, she abruptly left TMU, at the Student Learning Center. And I'm thinking, so what am I going to do without an accommodation advisor? So someone else, I can't remember, she said it'll be like a temporary replacement, but really that temporary feeling is permanent because she hasn't returned. Gafira hasn't returned, so it was quite disappointing. And I think I had another person that substituted, but I've like in my first year or two, I asked Gafira about how clockwork works, but they send the emails about reminding students to send their accommodations, click. But I did had an issue once where the courses weren't uploaded. So I reached out to Gafira, like, where are my accommodations? So, like, usually as an autistic person, I get easily anxious and worried if something doesn't go right or if someone responds late or hasn't replied back. So I get quite anxious. Oh, what's even in my liberal courses, it was like non-DST related. There was one professor that said that they got my accommodations, but the one thing that could be a bit of a problem is the peer assessment assignments, like the peer review assessments. But he said we'll try to work it around. So that was a bit of a first time. That was a bit of like a gonna work. But none of them had an issue with it. But and with other liberal courses, we did a lockdown browser to do the exams. But I had extra time. It's just that I have this like it takes me a while to process information to read the questions. But at Sheridan, that I always wrote my exams and tests and in-class assignments in the assessment center, on the main floor. Fall 2017, they moved the assessment center down to the basement level. So
Right.
because I had to do a bit of an extra semester because I didn't do the elective and the psychology course in the winter 2017 because though like a lot of courses that could really be very overwhelming. But I'm thinking like, what if the elevators are inaccessible? What if it's out of service? How can disabled students access the assessment center? But we had a faculty strike in 2017, November 2017, and then when we got back in December, I felt like I didn't had enough time to study. So I reached out to the sociology prof saying that I do need some extra time. And then she said, unfortunately, because of the restriction, like the policies or something, she said that if I needed extra time to study, I would need to have an incomplete grade on my transcript from the
Mm.
dean. And she said, would you, or you could study at your pace. So she gave me a choice, and I'm thinking, I am not going to get an incomplete on my transcript. So it's a bit not fair, especially when you're autistic and you're wanting to study. Because for me, it takes for me to understand and absorb information. So that's why I need extra time. But the most accommodation is extensions. That's one of my accommodations from both of the institutions because if I feel that I am unable to meet a deadline, I would have to reach out because I just need some more time to work on it.
Thank you for sharing. At York University right now, the number one accommodation I am always needing is extra time, and they've been good even if we don't have accommodations. Do you mind giving your perspective on what you would like to see in the education system in regards to professors, classmates? What would you like to see done to further support disabled students, primarily in post-secondary, but I also think it starts at even in preschool. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much for that question, Jules. So I think the one thing that professors and people like educators in general should know that you got to be really patient about people's access needs, especially if those people who are non-disabled or work outside of the DST program. Sometimes people would say question you like, why do you need accommodations? Why are you getting special treatment? I want to be clear here that accessibility is not special treatment. It's not an afterthought. It is a right, a human right.
Yeah.
Because without accessibility, we would struggle in our education, especially when we are disabled and neurodivergent. So being understanding and just actively listen to a disabled student, what they need from you. And as I mentioned earlier, interdependence. So we help each other. So I think that a lot of people, there are some people who are just not really quite educated about accessibility. I'm going to emphasize some people because I know most people who are still willing to learn about access, about accommodations. But hopefully for York University, I would love to see more profs be very understanding. Also, take note from the Critical Disability Studies program. But mostly, as you mentioned about extra time, I also need extra time to do my assignments or to write or to do a quiz. I remember Mad People's History in TMU Disability Studies. I remember that I didn't do so well on the one of the quizzes. So I advocated for myself by booking an appointment to a meeting with my professor, Danielle Landry, super wonderful. But she really made me feel relieved, getting rid of my worries. And yeah, she was super friendly because I always like to meet with a professor in person rather than seeing virtually because it makes it more easier for me to get to know them. But the next two quizzes, she added extra time onto the other quizzes, but I did well on the others. So,
Awesome.
so that's the only thing that I can think of, just being patient and understanding, and as what I've learned in futures, actively listen.
100% as a social work student and just a human being, I think we should all actively listen. Your example reminded me of a time at Team U where we had three quizzes in the course, and on the first two quizzes, I got a C. And I spoke to the professor. I said, I'm studying, but I'm not sure why I'm getting a C. And the professor allowed me to write an essay instead of do a quiz. And on the essay, I ended up getting an A. It's more about asking the student, how do you learn? How can I support you? Because at the end of the day, people with disabilities know our strengths, we know our weaknesses. We don't need anyone to assume. If people simply ask, hey, do you need help? How can I help you? We might not even need help,
Exactly.
right? Oh, I wish people would stop assuming other people's capabilities because there is room for disabled people in post-secondary.
I agree with that one to stop assuming about what we are capable of. And like especially when a disabled person says I need accommodations and someone will say, "Are you sure you need that? You seem you can do that. You seem you're capable." As what you mentioned, we should not assume what we're capable of. If we do need extra support, extra time, it's up to us to make that decision to disclose our accommodations.
We are adults who should have autonomy. Shocker. I am wondering if you ever experience more of society being surprised that you're in post-secondary.
I don't know too many people who were surprised, but I also want to mention that I had a bit of an ableist experience in the employment center because this was like in for the job hunt, so it was like an intake meeting. This was in the South Common Mall in Mississauga, the service employment. I had a meeting with this woman who used to work. She asked me if I had any disorder or disability, and I said I do have autism. I am autistic. And she said, from how I see it, you don't seem to have autism. She was like, first of all, you ask me if I have a disability, and then you invalidate my identity. And then she's gave me an unsolicited lecture about how not everything in life is permanent, how all that kind of crap. Thank you for giving me that. But I felt so quite antsy,
Yeah.
but I had to in a respectful tone I said I was technically diagnosed like years ago, like for like 2 decades ago. It's just that when someone invalidates a disabled person's invisible disability, you're disregarding them. You claim to be an ally and yet you invalidate them. You're not being a good ally. As I said, you have to actively listen to what they're telling you. But I knew that my parents knew that I was going to excel in post-secondary education because the fact is I'm very vocal about disability issues. I just really like to ramble. I can't stop thinking about disability. I can't go a day without it because I live with it. So being vulnerable about it is something that I choose to do. I choose to act upon.
Thank you for being so vulnerable. I love to educate on disability. I started doing a bit of stand-up comedy on the side because that's how I cope with my disability, but more of people's perceptions of me. I used to get very frustrated that everyone assumed I was not intelligent, and now whenever that happens, I give them my card that shows Masters of Social Work student. Just thank you for your help. Here you go. So I'm wondering, how do you cope with injustices?
There is one strategy that I can think of is that I intend to block the words from my mind because it could lead to internalized ableism, and I hate ableism. F ableism. My friend and I, on the day of the last day of the disability lunch bunch in Mississauga, my friend John and I went to into the Jubilee Garden to hang out, and then there was this guy across from us. I believe he's from Turkey, and he was just very chilled, relaxed. We were just talking about philosophies of morality and making life decisions, what's right and wrong. And then I brought up that John and I are autistic because we went to school for 13 years. And then he sat like this. He was like, "You guys seem fine to me. You guys seem fine." And I said, "But just because you don't see our autism, it doesn't mean that we don't have it. You just can't see it." And then I also brought up about stimming. And he said, "How do you stim?" I shake my leg. I rub my thigh whenever I get excited, twirl my hair. And he said, "Everybody does it." He basically favors neurotypical stimming, like everyone does that, well, excludes the autistic stimming. So I'm thinking, yeah, I explained it respectfully. So what I've learned is that you don't really want to lash out at someone if someone doesn't know because it will make you look bad, be
Yeah.
unprofessional. So my advice is that you have to be respectful, have this respectful tone in a conversation. It was like, I think that your response is very misinformed and misguided. So here's how I can better explain it. So that's my way of coping. Because there are some people that may not know about they think they know about autism, especially you have knowledge from doctors and educators, ERFs who think they know about autism. But and I explained this in my podcast somewhere that disabled people are experts of lived experience. Both of us are disabled with different lived experiences. We have experiential knowledge of what it's like to navigate an ableist society.
Do you mind explaining what stimming is?
Gladly. So basically, stimming is the way of how we are in a situation where it's like mostly we experience a sensory overload. So people can rock or they can stim their fingers or use a fidget toy. So if it's feelings of anxiousness or feeling nervous or feeling excited, sometimes it's involuntary movement. But for me, I rub my legs a lot. I shake my leg, I shake my feet, but sometimes understanding of being nervousness. I get excited when I do that. But when I get anxious or try to meet new people, I just don't know how to start. Sometimes it's hard, but once you get to know me, it's quite easy, especially when you're very understanding.
Would you say it's a self-regulating emotion?
Most likely.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would tell parents that have a child that is newly diagnosed?
Yes. So when your child becomes disabled or is born disabled, the first thing that you should know that is you have to embrace it. Like sometimes like there are some parents who are in denial saying, "Oh, this can't be happening. Or I can't believe my our firstborn child will become disabled." Or if they will be diagnosed like on the autism spectrum. So I think that learning to accept the fate of your child is something you also want to also really want to embrace love to your child because it doesn't matter if you're non-disabled or disabled, they deserve to have a good human life, to have a personhood. I want parents to know that even if their child has a disability, there's also resources, or you could also talk to disabled people who have, or disabled parents, because there are families out there, parents who are disabled. My professor had a partner who had a disability. So a parent can become disabled. So they're also like experts of lived experience. But yeah, like learning to embrace and acceptance.
I always remind people that you too can become part of our community either with old age or, God forbid, that you get into an accident or trauma. There's so many different avenues where a person can acquire a disability,
Yep.
and I would like to show that it's not the end of the world if you're disabled. I started limping at 10 years old. I acquired a neurological movement disorder. So my neck, my hands, my right hand, and my legs used to move involuntarily. And I had awake brain surgery, deep brain stimulation surgery. So there's a battery in my chest that connected to two electrodes in my brain, and that's stimulating the movements. So I don't shake, but I'm still disabled, and that's okay. I walk with a limp, I use a wheelchair, I use a cane. That's okay. It's not a bad thing, right?
I
So,
want to clarify that there are disabilities that fluctuate. There's called
yes,
dynamic disabilities. So there's one day that there's a type of disability that fluctuates, and then the next thing it changes. I know a few people who have invisible disabilities that fluctuate. So never assume that they don't look disabled because you
yes.
don't know what they're going through or what they're experiencing in life. So I just want to clarify.
Episodic disability. You should never assume if someone is disabled or is not disabled. My advice is always just to get to know people. But warning to everyone, PSA, do not go up to anyone and say, "Hey, what happened to you?"
Those insensitive questions, or like,
Yeah,
oh, are you sure you're too young to be disabled? Like,
yeah.
anyone can become disabled at some point in their life. My dad has hard of hearing and he's in his 70s. My grandmother had dementia. My granddad had vision problems. My cousin Liam has ADHD. So disability can happen to anyone if you become disabled or you were born disabled. So it's part of the human life.
For sure. And again, disability is not a bad word. So, yay, I'm disabled.
We're both disabled people.
Yay! July Disability Pride Month. Woohoo! If you don't mind explaining a bit about Crip time is.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, in the disability community, we use the term crip time to describe our identity, like at our own, putting our own speed and productive level at our own pace. We live in a very capitalist society where it requires us to be at work on their time. But as disabled artists, educators, we often find that challenging because some of us experience a social burnout because I get a burnout at the end of the day, for example. So we resist to the capitalist norms of productivity. So working at our own speed and pace. For me, I'm also a podcaster. For those who don't know, it's called Our Voices Conversations of Disability. So I run my podcast on Crip Time. So I try to find like a day and to be flexible to a guest speaker of which day and works best for you. If something comes up, then we reschedule. So we don't really rush productions. So Crip time is how we experience time and space at our own level.
That's a great definition and matches your background too.
Thank you.
I also want to add on to that. For individuals with mobility disabilities, such as myself, I know for me, I need to plan everything. I use a wheelchair. I need to know which subway has an elevator, which venue is accessible, where's the nearest restroom. There's so many things we have to keep in mind when we're going out. And to add to that, folks with fatigue might plan something tomorrow, but they may wake up and not have the energy to go out all day. So it's about accommodating, but mainly listening to the disabled person ask how they need support or maybe reschedule. But do you have any advice to any disabled children or adults that are thinking about pursuing a post-secondary diploma or degree, but they're hesitant to?
I got some really good advice. So thank you for that question, Jules. So if anyone who's disabled who is planning or looking at doing post-secondary education, my advice is that if what your heart tells you, go for it. My experience when I was first introduced to disability studies through in my second field placement seminar, I felt hesitant. I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't quite sure if I was gonna be interested in it, but I ended up regretted being hesitant because knowing that I have a community, I've found family in my disability. Because knowing that the disability issues course in educational support that introduced me to disability studies, and that's something I wish I knew back then. I know, and there are some people who say not everyone is fitted for post-secondary, which I understand it depending on expenses for income. But if you have a passion, say if you want to pursue disability studies or do a program, the theater arts, or for computer science or any kind of program that you're passionate about it, follow your heart because as an adult, you also have the ability to make a personal choice, whether post-secondary is right for you. And I remember The Futures promo video that was broadcasted at Access Fest, I mentioned about how my life search for belonging is over because I found family. I found you. I found my Futures family, knowing that I got my disability community who will always be there for me, that people that actually give a damn about my identity. But yeah, if you're very passionate, if you're very vocal, if you want to make social change, post-secondary education would be a really great environment.
That's awesome. And I agree, my life has changed when I got into the bachelor's program. I felt so empowered, and it showed me that I can achieve a post-secondary degree. If you're passionate about something and it happens to require a degree and you have the financial means, I agree. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Andrew.
To say a big thank you to you, Julie, for inviting me onto the show. It really means a lot to me of allow me to be vulnerable about my autism, to share my expertise and knowledge. And I just want to make a big thank out to the Futures program who have made me become who I am and just being part of the family and just allowing me to initiate my own social change, to the Disability Collective, Tangle Art Plus Disability, and my parents, my friends and ERFs and teachers from West Credit, Camilla and Britannia, and Sheridan College. I wouldn't have been where I am without everyone there. So big thank you, Julie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. And for viewers at home, like, comment, subscribe, and keep rolling. Till next time.
Thank you so much, everyone.